Welcome to our fourth panel, the numbers game, how to use data to find our people. We're really excited about this, conversation, excited about all the folks that you're about to meet. So if you're just joining us for the summit, welcome to the Registered Democrats Summit. So this is the first nationwide gathering specifically focused on registering new Democrats all across the country. So here at Field Team 6, we began as an in-person voter registration organization. In early 2020, the goal was to help register 100,000 people in person. Then the pandemic hit, and we had to start acquiring data and moving towards a digital organizing structure, which is where I was brought in. So after that, we began acquiring data, which began with a first data set of unregistered college students, developing out a CRM and developing out a data platform that has now helped us register about 1.6 million new Democrats, and that's before the 2022 cycle. So we'll be announcing those numbers in the next couple of weeks. So we're really excited to have this conversation and to move forward. Our first panelist is Michael Frias, who's worked on campaigns from municipal to federal, from Arizona to California and Florida to Ohio. He served in President Obama's Department of Homeland Security, where Secretary Jay Johnson awarded him the Secretary's Award for Excellence. He's currently the first Latino CEO of Catalist, one of the nation's leading progressive data and analytics firms, and one of our great partners here at Field Team 6. So hello, Michael. Our next panelist is Max Wood, who worked on both Obama campaigns and has consulted for dozens of campaigns and organizations. In 2015, he founded and became CEO of DEC to help progressive campaigns of all sizes build better lists, run programs more efficiently, and find their voters more effectively using targeted ads. Since then, DEC has helped thousands of campaigns, and thanks to the DNC, DEC is now free for all general election Democratic campaigns. Next up is Joe Garland. He's the Director of Analytics at TargetSmart, a premier provider of data-driven solutions that empower Democrats and progressives to understand, engage, persuade, and activate voters. With 15 years of experience at the intersection of political data and progressive organizing, Joe has developed revolutionary products that have earned crucial victories in campaigns across the nation. He and his team are experts in machine learning and predictive modeling techniques, and they build custom interactive dashboards that give users the strategic intelligence they need to efficiently target high leverage voters in real time. And last but certainly not least is Lala Shu. Lala is a Democratic data analyst who most recently served as the Deputy Coordinated Director on the Arizona Coordinated Campaign, helping elect Senator Mark Kelly, Governor Katie Hobbs, and a range of other great Democrats. Previously, she served as the Director of Data Analytics for Biden, for the Biden campaign in Arizona, and worked with me on the Pete Buttigieg campaign. She worked in Iowa, I worked in South Carolina, where she was the data director for Pete out in Iowa. She received her undergraduate degree in economics and statistics from Cornell and her master's in brands, communication, and culture from Goldsmiths at the University of London. So hello to all four of you. So excited to have you. So I'm just going to start off with a quick asking all of you quickly to talk about the companies that you work with, and Lala to talk about the role of a coordinated campaign, but to talk about sort of the focus that your company's taking on Democratic data, and then Lala, how, if to button all that up at the end, how you use all those data on a campaign side. So I'm going to go in the order that it is on my screen. So we're going to start off with Max.
Hi, folks. Yeah, and for DEC is like a targeting app that campaigns used to reach people. I think with like unregistered voter data, obviously the individual person level data that you can get from folks like TargetSmart and Catalist is really useful and opens up a range of tactics that weren't available to us, many years or several years ago in many cases, like running targeted digital ads, doing direct mail, all of that. I also think something we've been playing around with and finding a lot of success with is taking sort of other categories of data, you can take like housing data, for example, right? That has 100% completion on these are like domiciles where people live. And then you can take all the registered voters in the voter file and see, well, which homes don't have anybody who's registered to vote in them. And what was the Biden vote share in this precinct, and do creative stuff that way. That of course still relies on the registered voter data from companies like Catalist and TargetSmart, or the DNC if you're on the hard side. And so yeah, I think one thing that we run into is that whenever our side, our ecosystem, I think has access to a resource, we optimize all of our tactics to sort of go deep on that resource and run program to sort of exhaust it. And then 2 years later, we have to sort of figure out how to get a little more creative about how to leverage those existing resources, build new ones. And so I feel like the tactics and program piece is sort of constantly evolving. I know, a lot of folks had a huge success doing registration by mail a couple of years ago. But previously that hadn't been very successful. We've seen like pretty efficient digital ad registration programs, but that'll probably exhaust itself too. And so finding the exact way to reach people is a real challenge, even with access to all this rad data.
Thank you for that. Michael.
Hey, all. Thanks for having us, Cory, and good to see Max and Joe meet you, and Lala. Great work in Arizona. That's my home state, so I'm very proud of all the progress Arizona's made. I'm Michael Frias. I'm the CEO of Catalist. In a couple of weeks, we're about to celebrate our 17th anniversary. So it's fun to see, HGL on earlier and Hillary talking about all the new folks that are coming into the space and doing great work. And I think, what I'll start with is, Catalyst is a pretty unique organization in the ecosystem. We're an LLC held in a trust, and that trust really defines what we can and can't do. So first and foremost, we don't do any commercial activities. So, we're not a dual use organization that has corporate work and government work and political work. We only do political work. That's first and foremost. Second is we only do it in the progressive ecosystem. So we only work for progressive Democrats, never work with Republicans. And then lastly is a really great feature is we can't really be bought or sold, and any profits that we generate get reinvested back into Catalyst and help develop our products, our services, and our tools and our data. And so we're really well positioned in the ecosystem, and so we're really proud of it. And then lastly, just we're also the only union data and analytics shop in the ecosystem. And so, when I'm thinking about what we're doing here at Catalyst, one of them is the thing that folks will learn about, hopefully, here in the next month or so, is we do a large What Happened project, which is a post-election analysis that really competes with exit polls. We know exit polls are notoriously bad. And our report that we publish publicly and put out, the What Happened report, is our opportunity to really evaluate the coalition of voters that came out. Interestingly, I heard earlier in the presentation about driving down ballot. So the incredible product that we have allows people not only at the statewide federal races or statewide constitutional races, but all the way down to congressional and state legislative races, to be able to evaluate and examine what the coalition of voters were that supported winning and losing candidates and campaigns, to help inform people make better decisions. And then second, the other thing that we're really focused on, and I credit Cory, and all the voter registration orgs. And I think what's unique, about what Field Team 6 is doing is they go with the express purpose of registering only Democrats, right? Like in a world that's kind of mixed and divided, with C3 money often leading the voter registration, which we provide. It's really incredible to have like a voter registration partner that is clearly expressly, doing non-C3 voter registration in this space. Has really pushed us to expand kind of what data is available. We're really good at sourcing, because of our hub and spoke model. We can source commercial data like Melissa data, some folks may be familiar with, that provides housing data or address data. We can acquire it once and then redistribute it out to our network and our clients. And so that's a really effective business model. And so I'm happy to be here and eager to jump into the conversation. So I'll stop there.
And we're going to keep pushing you. You've been a wonderful partner these last couple of years, and have certainly helped us continue to grow and expand our operation, and excited to continue that friendship and partnership. Joe, you're up.
Thank you, Cory, and especially thank you for putting on this summit and this panel. Just being able to gather all these people in the same place, who are doing the hard work that often on the analytics side gets lost a little bit. We tend to focus on statistics and coding and making sure that the products we make are as accurate as they can possibly be, so that we're helping work on the ground. And oftentimes that puts us in a silo. So to be able to communicate and to share a little bit of what we do with the community is really a valuable opportunity. So thank you for putting this together. My name is Joe Garland. I'm the Director of Analytics at TargetSmart. By way of apology first, I've got an 11-month-old daughter who is going to be demanding lunch fairly soon. So if you hear some babas and mamas, that's my bad, sorry. She's cute though. So a little bit about TargetSmart. We are a full service data company serving the Democratic and progressive space. Our goal is to help candidates up and down the ballot on the Democratic side win elections. And when I say full service, our goal is not only to create the best voter file that we possibly can, and I'll expand that definition a little bit since we're talking about registering voters, the best file we can create of voting age adults in the United States. Which includes a fair chunk of unregistered voters who we need to gather as much information on as we possibly can, so that we can do the analytics that it takes to find them, target them, determine who's likely to register on their own, potentially register with a little bit of a push, and give groups that are registering voters across the country the tools they need. So I'm the Director of Analytics. We have a full service analytics shop that builds predictive models, data visualization tools, dashboards that can allow campaigns and organizations to see how effective they are in real time. Really anything that it takes on the data side to help a campaign win, that's our bread and butter. We work closely with our polling team, with our digital shop, with our strategic consulting team, to be a full service stop for campaigns that really want to make the most of their data. So, I'll back off a little bit from the TargetSmart pitch a little bit and just, leave with one quick point, which is that with regard to registering voters, it can really be a tricky analytics project. And I think we'll have a good opportunity to talk about that over the course of this hour, but it's much trickier than modeling registered voters and seeing, how likely we think someone might be to support our candidate, or to even cast a vote in the first place, or to donate, because we're dealing with murkier data. So I hope we get a good opportunity to talk about sort of the commercial side of data acquisition and what it takes to really build a good product on this front.
Yeah, that is certainly the core question here, and we'll be diving into that in just a minute. So Lala, from the coordinated campaign / campaign in general perspective, can you talk a little bit about the work that you do to pull all of this together and synthesize it and push it out, and how you work with data vendors and how you sort of take everything that we just talked about and then make sure that volunteers and organizers and everyone else can use it essentially?
Yeah. So as I'm sure most of y'all attending today know, like campaigns are as much art as it is science. And I think an important part of what the coordinated campaign does is, one, it like pulls together a bunch of the resources from all these different campaigns that have bought into the coordinated campaign to make sure that we are maximizing our resources, maximizing the time that we're spending on the ground, and making sure that we're not doing duplicative work. And a big part of that is pulling together all this data from these amazing vendors that are providing us with the information that we need in order to make the most informed decisions. And so what we're really looking at is looking at all of these different pieces, and then looking at also what resources we have on the ground, what we're actually feasibly able to take action upon, and then making a decision in terms of where it makes the most sense based off the data, and then also what we're seeing on the ground, to see where we can make the most impact in terms of registering the most amount of voters, in terms of talking to the most people, in terms of seeing where we can make the biggest dent.
And you are just about the best in the country at doing that. You know, for folks on this call, and not just to toot the horn of those of us who worked on the Peak campaign, but Lala was the person who knew the exact counts in every single room and knew how to take a small town mayor from, you know, a town of how many people were in South Bend into winning the Iowa caucuses and the final Democratic Iowa, or final First in the Nation Iowa caucuses. So really grateful that all four of you are here. I want to go really into the central question that Joe just brought up of the difference between data on registered voters and unregistered voters, and how your companies are thinking about that. And Lala, your thoughts on sort of how we approach this question of you know, how do we take this idea of registering new people, which is essentially taking the voter file flipped on its head, and how do we create that file, and how do we, you know, continue to build that file in a, you know, equitable and usable way? Does anyone want to take the first stab at that?
I can take a quick stab. So, look, I think from a voter file company, this is an interesting challenge, right? Because, you know, well, maybe not all people know. So when we collect all the voter files, that's everybody who's registered. We then go through a process, a commercial append, which is basically we're trying to find as much information about the people that we know that are registered, and in the process, acquire names and records of individuals over the age of 18 that are also potential voters or unregistered voters. And so that's like a really simplified version of it. I think there's two components of this. I think as we look younger and younger folks to register, I think organizations like Field Team 6 and Civitech and others that are trying to get that bridge, that 17 to 18-year-old group, or those college students that are really hard to find, because whether or not they're using their parents' mailing address or whether they're using their school mailing address is like, there's some murkiness there. And so I think organizations focused down ballot, like focused on that, is really beneficial. The value add that voter file vendors can bring, and you know what we do is we want new registrants to be actually new registrants. And so Catalist has record linkage, and has kept, you know, every iteration of every voter file we've collected over the last 17 years in all 50 states. And what that enables us to do is actually know in type code, just a fancy way of classify people, are they a new registered voter in a new state, because there are lots of movers, and obviously with the COVID disruption, people were moving everywhere. And so what we're able to do is basically say, well, it's a new voter in this state or in this congressional district or in this county, but actually they have this long history of voting where they were living before. And so what we really try to do is sort through that, because at the end of the day, you're really trying to add people to the voter registration rolls, as all of you are talking about, during this panel and during this little one-day summit. So from our perspective, that's the value add that we add once somebody's registered, is to say, is this truly new, or is this somebody that has a record of voting? Because that will matter, to Lala's point, like about efficiency. If we can port over somebody's vote history record, then they don't treat them necessarily as a newly registered voter. That's a voter that has a history that they should know about, and then they can design a specific treatment for them.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. Joe, I mean, you were talking a little bit about sort of that difference between a registered person and a registered Democrat versus someone who's unregistered. Can you talk a little bit more about how you think about those different scoring models and what goes into that?
Sure. So I caught the tail end of the last panel where there was some discussion about North Dakota not having voter registration, right? I mean, the story here is that voter data is messy. Data on voting age adults in the United States just is messy. And that leaves us in a place where we need to be really creative and strategic up at the forefront to figure out, first of all, how to build an accurate file or set of files that we can deliver, but then how to perform the analytics on that. And Michael, thank you for more or less delivering the TargetSmart pitch. I mean, we're working in parallel, right? It's the same goal to pen consumer data onto voter data and make the most complete file that we can make. So that allows me to kind of jump into the analytics side of it. It can be tricky. So the primary thing that our analytics department does is build a suite of 60 some odd national models that we keep on our file and deliver as part of our core database product. Those models are meant to predict all manner of behaviors. So one of the key parts of that is our partisan score, where we're predicting how likely somebody is to identify as a Democrat on a scale of 0 to 100. And I'll take a step back. Sometimes we encourage people not to treat those numbers as pure likelihoods, but more or less you can think of it that way. We've got turnout scores that are meant to predict how likely somebody is to vote in a presidential general election, in a presidential primary, in a midterm, in an off year, et cetera, in a local election. So a suite of turnout models, a suite of issue support models. So how likely is somebody to be pro-choice, pro-environment, pro-gun control, any manner of issues that might be relevant to the community writ large. We try to make sure that we have a model for that on our file. And then we build a suite of custom models as well for clients who come to us with specific needs. And that's where getting into this how to register unregistered voters really starts to become a question, because we can't really build a full national model on registration likelihood and just pop it on the file, because we'd have a ton of null values for everyone that's already registered, right? And then in many cases, we're not necessarily delivering data on those unregistered voters. So this becomes kind of a special case to build modeling on unregistered voters and determine how likely they are, in some cases to register, but in more cases, just how likely they are to convert that registration into a vote. So that's tricky, right? When we build that suite of turnout models, we're not just building one model and calling it a day. So like our most recent build was for the off-year general election in 2023, predicting likelihood to vote in that. And for people who have a vote history, variables that describe that vote history are the variables that we care about most, that provide the most predictive likelihood in that model. So whether or not somebody voted in a specific election, a suite of specific elections. You know, like we might combine the last 3 gubernatorials and treat those as a single variable in the model. When somebody registered to vote becomes really important, particularly on the second version of this model that we build, which is for people who do not have vote history. The variables for people who don't have vote history are very different. The most predictive variables, I should say, are very different from those for people with vote history. So now we're building a separate model where age becomes a really important factor. Marital status becomes a really important factor, but the most important factor there is how recently somebody registered to vote. If you registered to vote a month ago and you have no vote history, you're far more likely to vote than somebody who registered 17 years ago. Then there's a third version of that model for people who are unregistered, people who, for one reason or another, you know, maybe it's somebody who does have some vote history farther back on the file. If we're able to do some commercial joins and discover that this unregistered voter who we think lives in New Mexico actually had a pretty substantial voting history in Wisconsin, then we take that Wisconsin data, apply that to that person's score, give them a different classification. But for people who we can't locate elsewhere in the country, who we have no record of ever having been registered or ever having voted, we're now limited even more on the data we can use. Remember that no vote history model with time registered as the top variable, you now take that totally out of the equation because this person's haven't been registered. We don't have a time on that. So those basic kind of demographic variables, age, marital status, vote history of people in the household you live in, those become really predictive. So being creative about the way that we build a model, not just necessarily taking a one-size-fits-all approach, but trying to dig into every corner of the data to find any ounce of predictive value we can find is really the story. And it's just a lot of work, you know, for a national file in a nation with, you know, 270 some odd million, you know, voter records and, you know, of voting age. It's a big undertaking with a lot of wrinkles. So, you know, being agile, being creative, and listening to people who have the highest stake in this kind of modeling is really the approach.
Yeah, that has definitely been something that that I've learned over the course of being in this role. A question from my good friend Bailey, and this is, I want to pitch this to Lala, of how do you, especially given your role as a deputy coordinated campaign director, how do you maintain this balance between a data-driven methodology and common sense inferences? So things that maybe data don't tell you about a voter, or that we don't have data on. How do you think about the space between those things, and how do you make decisions using sort of those two pillars?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions around, especially even with our own organizers. I think that when I was a data director, I spent a lot of time talking to our organizers about how we're using the data and how that's informing our decision making, and then also getting their feedback on what they were hearing on the ground, whether the data that we were using was actually being validated in the work that they were seeing on the ground. And so to answer your question more directly, I think that my philosophy around the data is just to use it as some broad guardrails around what we're doing. Campaigns obviously have limited amounts of money, limited amounts of resources, and we want to be sure we're using it in a responsible way while not being too prescriptive of what we're asking organizers to do on the ground, because we know that we might have a big picture view of, you know, what is our path to victory in, say, Arizona. But in terms of what happens in an individual precinct, in an individual neighborhood, no one knows better than that, knows more about that than our organizers. So broadly, we use the data as the guardrails and then refine it more as we hear more from our organizing team, from politicos on the ground about what makes most sense for the particular districts or the neighborhoods that we're looking in.
So I want to dive into that just a little bit more, because I know we have 100 people on this call, which is incredible. And a lot of the folks here, I know I've seen you all in the chat, are volunteers themselves, or the people going out into the field. Can you talk a little bit about how the data the data that they're generating in the field and how that comes back into the systems that you've built and that campaigns build all across the country to help inform continued decision making that you're talking about. So, how you continue to iterate on this and to build stronger decisions from everything that these volunteers are doing. When Leora goes and sends a postcard in New Mexico, how do we take that back and then update how we think about reaching out to that group of people or to a different group of people in the next wave of that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit first about the data that we're collecting, and then I'm sure Max and Michael and Joe probably know more about how that data is being built into models and things like that. But in terms of the data that we collect on the day-to-day, the two big ones are contact results, which I'm sure that anybody who's been phone banking or canvassing is really familiar with, whether or not somebody is contactable, or if they're contactable, are they broadly friendly? Will they pick up the phone and not yell at you, or will they not set their dog on you? And then we also care about IDs, both candidate IDs and then also issue IDs, and collecting that data, we know broadly how you feel about specific candidates up and down the ballot, especially on a coordinated campaign. You want to make sure you're not just getting the people at the top of the ticket, but also people lower down on the ballot, which particularly in a state like Arizona is really important. We're very newly a swing state, and so a lot of the organizing that had been occurred on the down ballot level. And a lot of the down ballot ideas and the down ballot organizing actually differs quite a bit from what happens at the top of the ticket. So being able to parse these things out and factor that into our strategic decision making is a big part of what we are hoping to get in terms of feedback from organizers and volunteers. But I know that there's also a lot of the data that we collect also goes to whether it's the DNC, the DS, or to a Catalist, or to a TargetSmart or a deck. So want to definitely hear what y'all think about the data that we're collecting and how you factor that into your modeling.
Yeah. So I'm going to pitch this question to Max, but I want to include what Lala just mentioned of, how do you build these models? How do you build the scoring and the modeling around people? And then to pivot into what Lala just said, how do you then also take the feedback that campaigns and organizations are sending back up to you to continue to iterate on that?
Yeah. So our process of building models that predict, whether somebody will support a certain candidate, turn out to vote, things like be a contributor to a campaign, are based on a combination of the traits of the person that we're applying a score to, and a bunch of information on the campaign itself. So like, what are the traits of a campaign's donors? If a campaign has has an unusually large number of young donors, we might think that turnout among young voters is going to be higher than normal, right, in that election, or that that person might have an unusually young coalition. And we bring in things like media coverage, high salience election will have higher turnout, and things like that. And so when we're running these models, very similar to what like Joe was talking about, the unregistered voters have less data, and they also have more incorrect data, right? I mean, the registered voter file, as we all know, is like a messy product, but we're very lucky to have it. But the unregistered is like chaos, right? It's like, I mean, Joe and Michael know a lot more about this than me, but from what I understand, it's like people applying for credit cards, people signing up for sweepstakes, and all kinds of random things somehow get shuffled up into this body of consumer data that's available, and may have all kinds of flaws and may be outdated in all kinds of ways that are really hard to detect. So when we run our models on folks who are not registered to vote, the estimates are like lower confidence. So you're less likely to have 95% certainty this person is going to vote for Sandra, or like 0% chance this person's going to turn out for this election. You're more likely to have like, I don't know, 70% chance because they live in a household that also has a Democrat, or some other variables that will pop more for that person. And so like that's something to be conscientious about when you're using the kinds of targeting scores our companies make, is that if you don't have a lot of people like over 90% or over under 10% on your score range, that doesn't mean necessarily the same thing as when you're dealing with a list of registered voters with like a really nice detailed data footprint. And then as far as getting data back from the field, we have for campaigns, we have a relationship with the DNC where field data you're collecting is improving the models we run every day. And so that's, like something that's built into our work. As far as the voter registration thing, we did a project. This isn't necessarily something you can do in Dex, so this is me just like riffing about cool stuff in our space that folks can do. But we did a project with Univision a few years ago to do voter registration with digital ads. It was pretty successful. And one of the coolest things that we did was, Facebook optimizes for, like, is somebody clicking through, or you can put a pixel on the page they're landing on, and like Facebook will optimize delivery for people that are completing the action that you want them to complete. And Facebook's really, really good at that. But Facebook's not so good at like offline actions, or like somebody actually registers to vote, right? And so we built a workflow with, I think we were doing this with TurboVote, part of Democracy Works at the time. And basically, as soon as a person completed their registration, we would refresh a model that was predicting the probability a person in our like pool of folks we were targeting actually completed their registration. And we were using this to, on like a daily basis, refresh the custom audience in Facebook of folks we were targeting. And it just kept getting cheaper and cheaper per registrant until we got to like $5 to $10 a registration. That was at the very end. It started at like, $80 or something. But that's an example of how you can like bring in information and make it work better. It's in a digital ads context. And I think Tech for Campaigns did something smart where they were like, their custom audience was registered voters, and they just in Facebook like excluded those people and then had a bunch of other sort of optimization layers. So yeah, I think the field feedback loop for voter registration is like a gnarly problem that I think all the great organizers on this call should like think about and tell us what to do, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff that can be done there that isn't being done yet.
Yeah, and we do certainly have lots of great organizers on this call, and we are so grateful to all of our volunteers with Field Team 6 and with all the organizations represented here. And I know one thing that's been tricky with us, and I know if you have ever attended like a Field Team 6 phone bank or text bank, we get a much higher negative response rate than a lot of campaigns because of that uncertainty. So we're very grateful to the volunteers who stick it out and know that that's just sort of part of the process. I have a question here from Mary Lou Stern for Michael. Can you talk a little bit more about the data you get after an election? So talking about the your sort of post-election reporting, and how does that work? What makes it better than an exit poll? And what are sort of the top line learnings that we can take from it?
That's a big can of worms. There, if I could just step back, because I'm tracking a lot of these questions. So if I could just, Susan, Jeff, Lee, Mary Lou, and Yasmin had some specific questions, and I'll try to get to it. So what we do at Catalist is we collect the vote history. So it is the actual hard fact record. Did this individual vote in this election, or did they not? And so from there, our chief scientist, Yair, I'll drop a link in when I'm done talking to our What Happened report. That'll show you how this like spits out a report that basically shows you by demographic groups or by geographies, what was the level of support. Historically, what happens with exit polls is, like in Arizona, we'll use, for example, you had two top of the ticket candidates, right? You had Mark Kelly and Katie Hobbs. It's hard to determine who voted for whom. And then you get these exit polls and you don't really have like visibility into congressional state legislative district levels, right? You have to be like, well, it says Hobbs or Kelly got 62% of the Latino vote. So then what you basically do is say, well, let's suppose the congressional candidate got that in their district, the Democrat, or let's suppose that that was the level of support that a state legislative candidate got. What we try to do is apply a modeled inference of who you likely voted for down to the individual level and then roll it back up so that you can see unique trends. And you see the trends between top of the ticket and state legislative races, and you see the role that ethnicity plays in candidate selection. You see the role that gender plays in people's support for candidates. But there was a really interesting question at the top about how does this help grassroots organizations? And I think it's related to how voter files have been used and how I think groups like this are expanding its use. Historically, voter files have been used to divide, right? It's like the campaign is saying, I know who I want to talk to because I have these models about what, you know, these folks are Democrats, these folks are Republicans. And then you've already dictated it. What we're trying to encourage people to do is think about the voter file as like a resource, like Lalo was saying, that opens up the potential opportunity to, you know, have more conversations with more people. Part of what we're trying to do here is, you know, our vote propensity score. You know, let's acknowledge that there are some individuals in certain communities, Black and Latino communities, that are disadvantaged and hurdles are put up to prevent them from voting. So if that's not factored into your vote propensity model, or at least a consideration, you can end up building a universe that is not representative of the community or the population that you want to like turn out and vote. The second thing that's really valuable for grassroots organizations is, I already talked about the type coding, but the second thing is, once you record this data, I can't speak to the party side. There was a question there about the party, but part of the value that Catalist has derived over the last 17 years is we collect all of the responses from every canvas and door knock that any of our clients have engaged in, and it's been synced back to us to help build these models, which gets to another question that somebody said was like, is there any way to coordinate? Because I keep calling these people and they tell me, you're the 13th person that talked to me. Here's the challenge. There's a hard side and a soft side. They can't talk to each other, so they can't tell each other who they're talking to in their universe. So if you're kind of in a target universe, you kind of vote, you kind of don't, you're getting on everybody's list. There's an effort now with the Democratic Data Exchange, the DDX, to try to help streamline that. But it is something that we as data providers are very concerned about, because we know that people are going to use the cell phone to have conversations with folks, but also use the cell phone to do SMS text messaging. And there's a big concern. We call it like the Lorax issue, which is like, if we keep burning through these numbers, there's going to come a point where we don't have enough numbers to talk to folks about. So anyway, there's a lot here, and you know, I could go on and on about this stuff, but I do think like fundamentally recording the data, 2 is it's about efficiency, 3 is appreciating there is messiness on the ground and syncing that back into a database. And I think Max Deck is a really cool product because I think it makes the input really valuable and real time. I've started talking to folks about 2016. And what we're trying to think about here at Catalist is give people scenario-based like polling results, because what that does is it allows organizers and people on the ground to say, this universe that you're having me talk to, it's not flying. They don't like this candidate. They don't like this. And when you have a single number and everybody's like, no, we're doing well. When you present scenarios, it actually gives the organizers and the folks in the field something to attach to say like, hey, well, in one of these scenarios, it actually could be not great for us. And so like it's opening up people that are sitting at state or national strategy tables to have ears for what organizers are reporting back that about conversations they're having on the ground.
Yeah, I think that one helps answer a lot of folks' questions, but I think the comments about DDX and how folks are trying to figure out how we share data is a really important one. There was a question brought up in the last panel that I was on that I'd love to ask all four of you. Is there something that Republicans are doing that's better than what we're doing in the data space? Your comment about DDX is sort of what brings that to mind, but is there something that we can take from the way that Republicans are thinking about data? Yeah.
I'll take a stab at this one. I work in Arizona, but I'm originally from Texas. I am a consummate lurker at coffee houses, and one of my favorite coffee houses in Texas is a Republican like house meeting, organizational meeting spot. And so sometimes I just like to crash it and like sit next to them and eavesdrop on what they're doing. And one of the things I really notice, especially as somebody who comes from data, is how lax the Republicans are about their data dissemination and also their data usage. I see a lot of the organizations, like I know as Democrats, like we're quite, I think somebody mentioned above, like pretty protective and secretive about our data and our data resources, whereas Republicans just have their data lying out everywhere. There's like 40 million spreadsheets that I've seen. They're like very open about talking about it, and they just let what's organic happening on the grassroots happen, and don't seem quite as concerned the way that we are about gathering back all of the data. And that's something that I think is actually to their credit and probably is benefiting their organization greatly, that they trust that whoever is leading their local parties, leading their local organizations, have a grasp of what their team is doing and is holding them accountable for the kind of work that they need to do, and not being quite so protective and quite so restrictive and like not quite. We like to operate under the philosophy that if it's not in ban, it doesn't exist, and that clearly is not the case in the Republican Party, which I think is building.
Makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, we have about 90 seconds left, so I'm gonna wrap it up quickly and then ask folks just if you have one last sentence to say. But just want to thank everyone who's come to watch this panel and be a part of this. Means a lot. This is the first of its kind summit, and it means a lot that the folks from all of these incredible places have taken the time out of their day to come and talk to us. One thing, just as someone who works for a grassroots organization, we sent invites to every Democratic data company and every company that works on Democratic data. Take note of who showed up to support the grassroots and what that means for sort of the growth. For the growth of the broader democratic movement. I think that's very telling, and very grateful to the folks who have shown up and who are continuing to have these conversations. Next up, we have some incredible opportunities and things that we're definitely excited about. We have another panel in a couple of minutes with Brian Tyler Cohen and some incredible secretaries of state and the Secretary of State of Arizona, as well as a couple of other really exciting defenders of democracy. And then we also have a partnership on how to partner with Field Team 6. So for those of you who work with organizations anywhere in the country who are looking to partner with us to help register Democrats in your region, head to that panel or that workshop actually, and we will have lots of conversations about how you can partner with us and continue on. All three of the data companies that you have heard from today are also part of Vendorville. We'll be doing 15-minute conversations around the products and services that they offer. So DEC and TargetSmart will be up in the next block, and then Catalist will be up a little later this afternoon, but that schedule is in your email on the website, lots of different places. After this, we're going to head back to the Zoom main stage, but I just want to give a quick farewell from all of our panelists, and then after that we'll head out into the main stage. So I'll just do a rapid fire. We'll do it in reverse order. Lala, if you have anything you want to say to farewell.
No, it was great to be able to chat with all of y'all and see all the comments in the chat. Definitely gave me a lot to think about, and it was great to, I've used all of y'all's tools, but it's great to finally meet Max and Michael and Joe. So thanks for having me.
Joe?
Thank you to everybody who showed up today. Really great to have this conversation. Max, Michael, absolute pleasure meeting all three of you and doing this panel with you today. The one thought I'll leave everybody with is that the team that works hardest wins. This is the case in every election. And we're going to keep doing everything we can on the data side in every cycle, but keep that enthusiasm up on the ground, and we will continue to win.
Thank you. Michael? Just a very big thank you to everything you all are doing. We provide resources and we try to make them as good as possible, but at the end of the day, it's all of you on the ground having all these very, sometimes good, sometimes bad conversations. Being a union organizer myself, I know how painful that is. And so just really, really appreciate all the work that you continue to do and do steadfastly year in, year out, cycle after cycle when there's no fanfare. So thank you.
We appreciate it. All right. And Max.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a great panel to be on, and really grateful to be a part of this awesome event with people doing really valuable work. So thanks for your time.
Well, thank you all. The link to the Zoom main stage, which is where you can find information about our next events, you should head there. Otherwise, thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all four of our panelists for taking time out of your day and for being a part of this. So thank you all so much. Have a good one.